All right, welcome to the podcast. I am hanging out with Christine Sandford and Roger. I'm going to butcher your last name, Létourneau.
Yeah, you got it.
Is it?
Yeah,
Awesome.
you nailed it. Yeah.
So a lot of vowels there.
Yeah, it's a name of a bird in French.
Oh yeah,
like a blackbird.
Okay.
Type thing. So yeah.
Nice. Okay, so you guys have a lot of descriptors behind your name. So you're both chefs, product development consultants, co-owners of, and again, I'm going to butcher the names probably, Lessig Ferments.
Lessig. It's the German word for vinegar is Essig, so it's just Lessig because my last name. So
okay, cool. And then Vagabond pop-ups. So I want to talk about, definitely I want to talk about all of that. I want to start though with just you guys being chefs, because I'm always fascinated by people who become chefs, because when you look in a kitchen, at least for me, it's frantic, it's chaotic, and I'm eternally grateful that chefs exist, because I don't know what kind of mush we would eat if we didn't have, chefs going, you know what I'd like to make. But I'm always curious, what attracted you to that as a career? I'll start with you, Christine.
Ooh, I don't know. I think when I was younger, I don't know. I'm not like a lot of people like, oh, my mom, taught me how to cook. And although she did, she would be mad if I didn't.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mom. But I think it's just maybe because I grew up here, it's taken a while for Edmonton culturally to take off. And I think it was when I went to Europe for the first time after high school. I was like 18. And I just was like, oh my God, like I had no idea that markets existed. And then I tried all this food and just the combination of everything, arts and culture. And I just got really inspired by that. And then I came home. I think like initially I wanted to do something either in design, like an interior design or psychology. And then I don't know, I kind of came home and I thought about it for a bit longer and I wasn't really sure. I didn't really know anything about it. Like
right.
I guess I had worked in a restaurant. I worked at Eastside Mario's as a hostess. So I had a bit of an idea of what restaurant culture was like, but not from a kitchen perspective. So I just sort of like enrolled myself into culinary arts school and I had no idea what I was doing. And I really didn't. I went there and a lot of people there had already worked in restaurants and the kitchen, and I had none of that. So
you went to Europe right after high school?
Yeah, right after high school.
Were you working in restaurants when you were in Europe, or at that point? No.
I just went on like a pretty typical backpacking trip with my high school boyfriend, and we just stayed in hostels. And I think that's like, I didn't really think about how much I liked cooking, because I remember he would be like, let's just buy a frozen pizza, and he wanted to eat that for every meal. And I was like, no, we need to like go to the market and find the food. And then I was always mad. I wanted to experience the culture, and then especially that didn't work out.
Yeah, especially in Europe, like you said, like I feel like I remember one time being in Italy, and just the mentality that we have as Canadians is, if you buy, say, fruits and vegetables, you can kind of like, so we were going to be in a certain place for a week, so it's okay, we'll buy like a week's worth of fruits and vegetables, and by day 2, like it was all spoiled. And it's just their stuff is like the market culture is like, you go to the market every day and you buy what you need for that day. It's like whatever they do, their tomatoes don't last 3 months like they do here, you know? So it just kind of lends itself to being creative and kind of like being inspired to cook, I find.
Yeah.
So what about for you then? What brought you to the idea of being a chef?
I mean, I wanted to be an accountant. I was like, I'm going to go to business school. My dad kind of owned like this small business, and I thought, I can make a lot of money going into finance or investing. So I had like a stock portfolio in high school, kind of like trading stuff. And I was like, and then I got to business school at NAIT, and I really didn't like it. So I ended up dropping out, and same thing. My brother was like, I'm going to Europe for like 3 months. My grandpa lived there and stuff. And we went there, and I came back and I was like, I don't know. It was so much culture. And I think, weirdly enough, I mean, my grandparents had like a garden and like kind of like a traditional lifestyle, so I did have a little bit of that kind of influence. And my mom was a hippie, same with my dad, so kind of like that sort of perspective. But I applied for a job at Moxie's restaurant, and they were like, "Oh, we don't have a position in the front of house. So do you want to work in the back?" I was like, "Sure."
Yeah.
And then and that was it. Like, and I think, you know, you don't know right away, but I think for me it was like I had done a bit of, like with music, which was like too creative in a certain way. There wasn't enough discipline, and when I did cooking, it's like I love to be creative, but I need, you know, my background having two parents that are hippies that didn't have a lot of discipline, and that kind of culture for me was the perfect. I could be creative, but also get discipline that I also enjoyed that environment. So
and that's and I was going to talk about that, because when you look at a kitchen, and like I said, I've never worked in a kitchen, so I'm just, when I'm looking at it, it's just like, how is, you know, the end result is something usually pretty beautiful, pretty delicious, but the way that it gets there, if you don't know what's happening in the kitchen, it looks like chaos. So it's kind of that perfect balance of like the creative process is happening constantly. It's you know, you're turning chaos into something very kind of structured at the end.
Organized chaos.
Organized chaos.
But there are different, like, you know, different chefs and that fall more on the chaos side, and they're able to handle more of that. And, you know, like we worked for the chef that we worked for in France when we were there, she was like more abstract, and she was able to, but some other chefs are like hyper technical. They're creative, but only within their discipline of technical knowledge. And they can't.
Well, she too, like, she was, you know, maybe more abstract in that, but like truly some of the best food I've ever had. But I think there is also like a level where you can be a little bit like chaotic or abstract with a lot of, like, she had a lot of experience, so she knew how to make, she would just, you know, it'd be kind of like messy or whatever, and she would just make this incredible dish like out of nothing in like 10 minutes or something, and that comes with a lot of experience. So
totally.
It's still organized chaos, you know, but like
I love that.
It's amazing, super inspiring.
Yeah, and like I said, like, I mean, I often wonder what kind of mush we'd be putting into our bodies if it wasn't for chefs there. You know, I've talked to chefs where, I remember this one guy, I'm like, so, like, what are you up to this morning? And he's like, I couldn't sleep last night. I was trying to figure out, and he had all these ingredients in his head, and he's like putting it together. I'm like, God bless you, because I wasn't thinking anything like that. So Christine, when we first met, you were the executive chef at Biera. So the first time that we ever met, was over Zoom, because it was during COVID, and I was doing a series with my friend Cam Dobransky, and he was just wanting to touch base with some chefs that he had known. And so you were, like I said, you were with Biera. One of the things that I always liked about like watching the creation of that restaurant and Blind Enthusiasm as a concept is, I feel like Greg Zeschuk like really kind of handpicked people that he wanted to be a part of it. So at some point you went to Europe, right, to cook. So what was it that you kind of, like, when you got the job at Biera, I'm curious kind of to backtrack a little bit to what you had done to kind of make yourself the perfect fit for that company.
I mean, I think, when I was just thinking, like, when we got back, we were living in Belgium for a couple years, and we had really kind of, I mean, I obviously didn't study beer or anything, but, you know, obviously it's pretty hard not to drink a lot of beer when you're living there. But I'd learned a lot about the Belgian cuisine and culture, and then I came back, and then I was working in a butcher shop, Acme, for a little while, and that's where I met Greg. Like, I think he kept coming in, and someone had introduced us, and at first I honestly, to be totally honest, I was not really that interested at first, because I just thought it was going to be like a really casual pub, and I was like, I just, you know, I was all hyped up. I got back from Europe working in these Michelin places, and, you know, I was just really, I was a bit younger, and so that wasn't really what I wanted to do. And then I think I met Greg for a coffee one day, and it just kind of changed my idea of what he was doing and like what you could do with, I guess, beer and food. He was looking to do something different, and I think because of my experience well, just working as a chef for a long time, but also working in Belgium specifically, like I knew what Cantillon was, and I like it kind of made sense. And then Doug, the other head brewer there of the Monolith, he had recently also been there, and then I don't know, we just kind of all clicked.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really worked with beer in that way, but I always really, I was obviously personally super into it. So I think, it was just my conversations with him and then meeting Doug, and we were all pretty like nerdy about our own craft, and it just felt like a good fit.
Yeah.
And,
nice.
I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what he would say, but obviously.
No, I mean, it was, but you're totally
Yeah.
right, because it was nothing, obviously not like nothing that had ever been, that had existed in Alberta, certainly. Right. So yeah, it was just the right people that came together. It was, so it's, for me, it's very interesting. Greg had such a specific vision with who he knew would be good fits for certain things, and it did come together really, really nicely. So, Roger, for you, you're the executive chef at Bar Clementine and Woodwork.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as a chef, how did you gravitate towards, those types of places? Like what would you say your style was as a chef?
Yeah, I mean, I really, during my time in Belgium and even before that, I had worked in Paris, and I there's a couple things that I have always kind of like a thread maybe through my career of interest is the first chef I worked for in Paris. He was like a pretty well-known chef, but he focused on wine pairings, and I don't know, for whatever reason, I was like, I want to work for this guy. The concept of working with a winery and designing a dish, it was something very new to me. And I think back at that time I was working at the Three Boars, and my friend Evan was kind of like, oh, we're working on this cocktail thing. And I think, I've always gravitated towards, I love learning about new drinks and things like that. And even in Europe, it's like, I'm a big advocate for like things like absinthe and, all the beer stuff we had in Belgium, and just there's so much to explore there. And I think I really got hooked into that. They were like, oh, we're doing this cocktail thing. And at that time in Edmonton, it was a novel thing. And, now the cocktail scene is a little bit more established, but it was pretty like cutting edge. And I felt like they were onto something. They had a lot of good experience and really were talented people. So that's a big part, I think.
Yeah. Because the Woodwork was just on, what street was that on?
Rice Howard.
Yeah. Because I got stuck in there a few times, and I don't get hungover on beer, but I get hungover on the cocktails for sure.
Yeah.
So then you started, and I'm gonna mispronounce it again, but Lessig.
Yeah, Lessig. Yeah.
Lessig Ferments.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let's start with what it is. Like what is it, and how did it come to you as a concept?
Well, I had experience like fermentation through different places I worked at in Europe, and I was really drawn to that in a big way. And so at Clementine, I used a lot of the dishes that I feel like were really big hits or people really enjoyed were things that I had used my kind of ideas about fermentation and put that into a dish. And I think that kind of gave me the idea, especially during COVID. It was like, what's the eventuality of being a chef in Canada in terms of the culture? Because when you move back and forth between these two countries or these two places, very different food cultures, and it makes you think like, what's the 20-year plan? Like am I gonna have a restaurant, and am I gonna make a dent in the culture? Like, is that enough of a tool to kind of like? And I think with the fermentation companies, like how can I access more people? Or be a part of a conversation that's not just in the service industry, but like production, and also, I don't have a green thumb, so I was never going to be a farmer.
Right.
But so for me, that was kind of like, okay, I can work with a farmer, which I already was doing as a chef, but also still connect with people in the restaurant industry, which I love.
Yeah. So talk about the product itself. So, because actually Peter, I was telling you guys, Peter, a mutual friend of ours, hooked me up with a little bit of it. But just talk about what the product is, some of the products that you're making.
Right now we have a couple of hot sauces. So the hot sauces are kind of, they're lacto fermented. So any kind of fermentation I'm using is using it to build shelf stability or like safety without using preservatives. So you're using old style methods that are also going to build flavor and nuance, kind of like beer making. How do you get it to keep that quality for a longer period of time? And so 2 hot sauces we have are using kind of local farms, or just trying to build the product around like, what do we have in Alberta that's really exciting, what and people that want to work with us and that kind of thing. So a couple hot sauces, one of them is kind of a cheese based profile with like a organic dairy farm, and the other one's like strawberries from BC, so it's kind of like that tropical sort of vibe. And then there's some more products coming out this year. Lots coming out. So one of them is a grenadine that we're using from fermented rhubarb, so honey and rhubarb, and going to kind of build a grenadine product. So that's kind of like, what do we have here that's interesting, that we can kind of showcase our fermentation as a way to preserve and kind of enhance the product.
That's cool. And the name comes from, what did you say?
It's the Essig is the German word for vinegar. So we're working on a beer vinegar. It's been a bit of a long process, but that's kind of like, to me, is like maybe kind of a cornerstone to a lot of products. When you think about like mustard, pickles, any kind of condiments, what are you using in it? It's usually vinegar.
Right.
So to be able to think about like, how could we change maybe the way people think about vinegar is not just like, oh, it's white distilled vinegar. What is that? Where does it even come from? It's kind of an obscure product, apple cider vinegar. Like, are these apples how do they ferment them? Like, there's not a lot of information around that.
That's true.
So kind of having that as part of our like foundation for other stuff as well will be something that we're working on. So
I like that. Yeah. So Christine, did you leave Biera specifically to join this project, or what was your not what was your reason for leaving, but when you left, what was the next project on your mind?
I mean, I think I still helped you a little bit with it at the beginning. I was pretty busy, so I think I left just because it's an awesome place. I love it. I have I still go there all the time, but I think for me, I just sort of like, I guess, I don't know if I would say like hit a certain ceiling, but I just kind of, I'm like, have a very entrepreneurial mindset. So I think I was sort of, okay, I'm like ready for the next thing, and I don't know what that is.
Right.
And, there's like, I'll be super honest in saying I was also a little bit burnt out, and that happens. You probably hear that often from chefs. Yeah. Pretty easy to have that happen. But I just kind of wanted to see what other skill sets I could pursue. And, I think we always knew we'd work together with Lessig. We're both very different in how we approach things. Like, you're very methodical and scientific, and I'm like that a bit, but not to the level that you're at. So, you really bring that. And then I have, maybe, I don't really know what else.
Well,
what my
taking a photo, for example. I'm terrible at. I'm like, how did you? I can't see. And then she'll take a photo, and I'm like, how did you even? How's that possible? You could get that. So
like people that are good at that, like they think it's easy. Like I'm like you. If I take a picture, I'm like, okay, why can't I make it look? And then someone else thinks, okay, that looks like you could frame that and put it on the wall. Yeah. I love that. No. So you guys recently went to France. Mm-hmm. So what I love is when people are able to kind of combine their passions. So obviously food is a passion for you. And then traveling is a passion for you guys. You've both been to Europe. You've been a few times. So what was the France trip all about? Because you were there for a year, right? What was the research and development portion of it?
Not to speak for you, but
no, go ahead.
Initially, like Lessig had actually, I think you really wanted to do vinegar production, hence the name being Essig. Mm-hmm. Essig means vinegar in German. And you had been talking about working, let's back up here. Every time we kept bringing up that we wanted to do something with vinegar, people here are like, yeah, cool. And then you'd be at a party and like, how's your little vinegar business going? And we were always like feeling so
condescending motherfucker.
Like, what are we doing? Like, is this dumb? And I think going to France from an outside perspective, like you'd been studying these places, you can talk more about it, but Laguinel and all these vinegar producers that were like a pretty big deal in France, but you just like, you can't, where are you going to go to study like vinegar here? There's really no one doing it on a small level. There might be some industrial vinegar, but there's really nothing, you know, even fermentation. There's not a lot of like places to go study that. And so I think we just sort of one day, you know, I was ready for a bit of a change and a break, and you were wanting to study vinegar and agriculture and stuff, and we just, it was like a no-brainer to go to that area specifically.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the area was kind of, I mean, it was twofold, you know, we kind of knew the next phase, like, you know, with the kind of feeling a bit of maybe being a bit burnt out and stuff like that, and then kind of being like, hey, let's go get inspired, you know, because we had lived in Europe before, and I think sometimes in Canada it's like it's great to give, but sometimes it's hard to get like a bit of a challenge or feel like you're getting information or you're getting some sort of stimulation. Sometimes it can be hard to find that in Canada, and I think in Europe it's the complete opposite. It's overwhelming almost, you know. Yeah. And there's there's this lady who started she started a vinegar place like 20 years ago, and she's like, I think is like she's the godmother of vinegar in, I don't know, out of all the places that I've known anywhere, she really, it's such an old industry, and I think a lot of industrialization has impacted Europe more than people realize. But some of the other industries like cheese making, like Beaufort, they had to build a cooperative and withstand a lot of the pressures from those systems and figure out what's the new post-industrial artisan culture. What does that look like? How do we combine these elements? And she had figured out, you know, it's a tiny place, but she'd been working with barrel makers, balsamic producers, sherry vinegar producers, and wineries. So she knew wine as well. And it's like being in the epicenter of agriculture and having less barriers, I think, it just opened up the door. And so now her son works there, and this other lady who owns it now is running it. And it's like, it's just, culture is so unique that way. You don't need a lot of resources. And I think in Canada, we often think like, you got to scale it up, you got to get this grant or whatever. It's this tiny place. It's this just like a little sliver of land with a few barrels, and they go to all all these different shows, all these different trade shows, and all this stuff around wine. And it's just like, you don't need a lot to have this big presence of how do you cut through this dormant culture? How do you push back those walls down? And that's the work that they're doing. Yeah. It's not necessarily in volume or that kind of thing, which is another thing that you have to solve for too, because if you only have a small amount of products, only a few people can try your stuff. But it's just the mentality that I was attracted to, that she was able to carve this path. And,
But you're totally right. Like when you go to Europe, the inspiration is like, it seems like, because like vinegar, like your friends at the party would have said, is a pretty niche like passion, right? And so when you think about how we think of business here in Canada and just North America in general, it's all like volume and how do you make it bigger, and like let's get warehouse space and let's do this. Like, whereas like I feel like Europe, there's more of those like super niche kind of passions, and so when you go there, it's like the inspiration must be like amazing, because like, to your point, I've never put any thought into vinegar making, right? So there you go, and it's like you can see people making cheeses in a more kind of what would the word I'm looking for, like cottage country, artisan kind of like very small production, and it's seen as more like that's the way to do it. Like that's their perspective, right?
Well, there's also, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
There's also, I would say a lot of like support too from the government. Like small businesses there are a part of their culture. So they have that support and people want that and they expect it, so it's different. Whereas like here, you'd be always competing with Costco or somewhere, it's just not, we don't have that. And I think we don't have that support. Like you were saying earlier, even when you go to to apply for like a small business grant, they always want to know like how, like when are you going to scale up? Like what's your plan? How are you going to make all this money? And obviously making money is important, but there's just like not a lot of resources for these small niche businesses here, and that's a really big difference between Europe.
And that's an interesting point, because I think one of the things that we talk about in I'll say Canada, but certainly where we live is supporting local and supporting the small, but we don't often do that in every way that we can, right? Where I think it is baked into the local economies more in Europe to to be like, no, like that's where we get the cheese, that's where we go and get the we were talking about the market mentality and stuff like that versus here. So is that something you want to bring? Like when you talk about influencing Canada, is that sort of some of the culture that you want to bring back from Europe?
I mean, I've gone back and forth on that, and I think part of it I had to suss out was like, and I think we experienced that, is that like there is a level in Europe that we're never going to be like Europe, and I think you have to accept that and be like, well, what is the influence? Are we going to go full niche, and then people are going to be like, oh, that's really cool, but not really relevant. And so what's relevant to Canada and Canadian food culture? How do you actually have an impact like that? Because if you don't have the reverence for those small independent people like they do in Europe, then well, what do we have reverence for? Like at what level of engagement are people, and so initially I was like, oh, I'm going to make this really niche thing. But then I was like, well, maybe it's the middle of the road. Could I find something that's not too out there that could, because you think about all of the historical, the history of great food producers in North America, like the Dr. Heinz or whatever, they had big vinegar train cars that would transport vinegar across the country. That cheese company, what's it called?
I don't know.
Velveeta.
Okay.
Like same thing, like artisan was initially an artisan thing, but then like with Chicago and that kind of era, they started shipping things and they were having issues with shipping. So they came up with creative ways to, how do we process this so we can save some of our product, because refrigeration was an issue at that time. And I think it's just, maybe that's kind of like going back to what already has worked here, but we sort of deviated a bit too much into industrialization, where Heinz is not really about local anymore. Although it could, those kind of businesses can work here. And I think figuring out how to have a scale that's relevant to people's lives and accessible.
No, and that's exactly right. Transplanting just a totally different culture isn't going to work. So it's kind of like, okay, well, how can we influence the culture but kind of work within it at the same time? So what else did you do in France? So a year in France, you couldn't have just done vinegar.
A lot of swimming in the ocean.
Yeah.
Lots of hikes.
Anchovy factories. We saw a lot of Spanish, like Catalonia specifically. We're very close to Spain.
Yeah, we did a lot of. I mean, the area that we were was kind of like, I think when people think of south of France, they think of Nice and Monaco, but we were in the opposite end, so really close to the border of Spain, and it's not commercial at all. Like there's barely any tourism there except for French people and maybe some Dutch people, but that's pretty much it. It was very relatively unknown, and most people hadn't even heard of I actually didn't even, like when you were like, oh, this place Bagnols-sur-Mer, I had never heard of it. So I was like, let's move there. And I had no idea what to expect. And also my French is certainly not super strong, and yours is. But I think, we just wanted to go to a place that was a bit different and a bit more agricultural and a bit more accessible as well. Like I don't know, it just hasn't been taken over by tourism, so you can afford to live there. Like, it's actually kind of crazy. It was quite, affordable. So we just spent a lot of time visiting these little artisan places, and also not just looking at like the ingredients, but like the packaging. They had like cool packaging, or how do they, their tins and all the different methods that they use. So we did a lot of that around France and Spain, and then went up a little bit more to northern, like towards Brittany. And
because you were Christine had an obsession with butter.
I do.
So we went to this place in Brittany, and Brittany has, the history there is it used to be separate from France, so they didn't have a salt tax. So they developed cultured butter because they could afford to. That was the only reason
Right.
that they have a culture of butter there.
Yeah.
Is because of tax.
I nerded out about butter.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's good.
It's
Damn
very
good
good.
butter.
So you were saying that you don't speak good French. I don't even know if that was grammatically correct what I just said, but how important is it to, because I sorry if I'm stereotyping the French people, but I feel like they would be slightly intolerant to someone trying to speak English. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say they didn't love it, but I tried. Like I took lessons while I was there, and
Yeah.
I know a little bit. I can kind of like get by with a very basic conversation. I can order stuff at the store, but other than that, it's like if we get into a deep conversation about.
But do they
So,
appreciate that you're trying, kind of thing? Okay.
And they're pretty pushy. I know. Like we made quite a few friends, and they'd be like, "Why isn't your French better yet?"
Well,
it's not easy.
it's kind of like a lot of that area. You're by Spain, so people will speak Castellan, Catalonian, Catalan. They speak English. They speak French. They speak German, Dutch. Like they're all polyglots, all of them. So when they're like, "Oh, you only speak one language," it's a bit of a but they're also like they are encouraging. Sometimes can be a bit intense. But
it can be a bit intense.
I remember when I was a kid, I knew I went to Germany for a month when I was in high school, and I was hanging out with a kid my age, mm-hmm. and so he spent a month with me one summer, and I spent a month with him the next summer. And when he was learning English, basically as long as I could understand what he was saying, I'm like, yeah, good enough, Yeah. But then when I was trying to learn German, it was like if I didn't get the right phlegm inflection in my word, he'd be like, no, that's not. And I'm like, dude, I'm being pretty tolerant with your English. Like, do you want me to start correcting you because you're really wrong? And but I just felt like it was really hard to learn because it was like small corrections on every single thing. And I'm like, I feel like if someone is speaking English, and as long as you kind of know what they're saying, you're like, gotcha. Yeah, we're good.
I mean, that is it's not just language though. I think going from Canada to Europe is they're a lot more they're not passive aggressive, they're more direct,
right,
which can also be just aggressive, and so they're towing that line. Even
fair.
on the road, when they're honking and stuff, it's they're very it's not like honk honk I hate you, it's more like, hey, you're in the wrong lane or pay attention or whatever. So it's an interesting to get that culture too, because Canadians can be a bit soft, I think, sometimes also
in passive aggressive.
And being maybe we should be a little bit more pushy about things because we tend to get walked over by
That's
other
true.
cultures. So sometimes.
And actually, that's funny because me and my wife went to Europe for our honeymoon, and I hadn't been there since I was a kid. But I remembered, going on, driving on what's the highway in Germany? The
Autobahn. Yeah.
And if there's a Ferrari or something driving, they just flash their lights, and you better get the hell over.
Yeah.
And so I learned that as a kid. I'm like, why are they flashing their lights? And then it's just boom, and then this vehicle just passes going 200 miles an hour or whatever. Nice. And so when me and my wife got to Italy, and we had this little Fiat or whatever. Just a little small piece of shit car.
We had the same experience.
Yeah. And then I'm just driving. I'm passing someone. I see the flashing lights behind me, and instantly I'm like, oh shit! I remembered what it was, and thank God, because this thing just went cruising by. But you're right. They're not necessarily doing it to be assholes. It's just their way of saying you are in the wrong lane. I'm going 200 miles an hour. I win, and it's just fair enough, and it's just more direct.
It's more direct.
Yeah, which is cool.
It takes some time to get used to it.
It's different. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we were talking about, chefs being creative by nature. Was something, because making the leap from being a chef to being an entrepreneur, I'm always curious about, was that something for both of you that has been something that you thought you would always be? Do you think being a chef makes the transition easier just because you kind of already are using that creative muscle? What's your thoughts on that?
I think a lot of times when you tell people you're going to be a chef, I experienced this, you might have as well, they are it can be a little discouraging. I remember when I I said, oh, I'm going to become a chef. And everyone was like, why? I'm like, why would you? You know, my parents weren't like, they were supportive, but I don't know if they were thrilled about it. But I think, you know, we've talked a lot about this. It's the kind of industry where you can go in and you can be a line cook for your whole career if you want. But when you become 40 years old and you've been standing on your feet for your whole career and you don't have any other skills in the kitchen other than just cooking on the line, then that can be a struggle. But I think the cooking industry, like there's so many different areas that you can take it. And I know, you know, if you want to really specialize in management, the kitchen is an incredible place to learn how to manage people.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you have high emotions, it's stress, you have all sorts of people coming in and out. And so you become, if you want to do that, you become very good at it. And, you know, or you can, you know, take it in different, there's just so many different things that you can do with it. And, you know, I think, you know, if you don't apply yourself and try and get as much as you can out of it, then it can be challenging to get into your, you know, 40s or when you want to start going in another direction. Like if you don't utilize what's given to you and push yourself, then I think that it becomes hard. You know,
absolutely. So and you mentioned at Biera that you kind of hit that ceiling. So was that kind of what you were thinking? Is like, okay, it's time to kind of learn some new skills and move on?
Yeah, I think so. Like you know, you have to like also question yourself. You know, even for me on a personal level, I was like, am I my best self right now? Like, do I just need to like take a step away? And then that was a big part of it too. And I think you also do hit sort of a ceiling. Like obviously with a business, I was there for 7 years. There's lots of things that you could still do. There's never a moment where, you know, never a dull moment or a moment where you couldn't add things to your plate. But I think just my, I don't know, personally, what I wanted out of cooking just changed. You know, and I just all of a sudden,
which is good.
Yeah,
right.
Like,
it's okay for that to happen.
And it is, yeah. And I think, you know, even at the beginning, maybe I was more geared towards, you know, I was a little bit more competitive, or like awards would come out, you know. And that's another thing. Like awards used to really mess me up. Like if you didn't get on a list or you know, something, it would like, you know, it really, you know, you have to be cautious about what is fueling you too, because that stuff can, you know, it's not always I mean, it's great. We need the awards, and that's a whole nother topic. Go down that rabbit hole. But just all of a sudden, like the things I wanted out of it started to change, and so, you know, I think a big part of it is like stripping everything away, and this is like a big part of what we talk about often is, like what, I don't know, when you strip out all the, you know,
the bullshit.
Really? Yeah.
Like what is it left? You know, what are you left with? And I think I kind of got lost in what I cared about, and that's a big reason why, you know, we want to go to France and remind yourself, like, why do I even like cooking, and like what about being a chef inspires me, and like, you know, even managing people gets hard. Like I've always done it. I've always, since I started any job, I've always just like fallen into a management role. But like, you know, sometimes that can be exhausting, and you can get decision fatigue. And so I guess it's just taking all that away and being like, what are the things I actually really want to do, and how can I make a difference with what's left there?
Actually, with that's a good. I wanted to ask you about Vagabond.
Yeah.
Because that's a concept that you guys kind of came up with while you were in France, right?
Yeah.
Is that, on some level, is that kind of answering that question of like, okay, stripping everything away and imagining something that I want to do as a project? Maybe talk about what Vagabond is and how that applies there.
Well, I mean, the first pop-up we did was in France. We were working at this little sort of a wine cave. So there was called LMFAB, and there was 9 winemakers there, and the chef and her husband owned the restaurant part of it, and they were super talented. And then they were like, do a pop-up here. And so we kind of tried to figure out, you know, should we, I don't know, I guess we'd done a lot of pop-ups before, and we were like, should we start this again? Like, go back to our roots. That's actually how we met too. Yeah. And another pop-up group. But, and then we came up with this idea to call it Vagabond, because we just, I don't know, it's our vibe, just a couple of vagabonds.
Yeah, a couple of vagabonds trying to travel. But the interesting thing about the place we were working at is it was stripped back. It was so, like, there was nothing superfluous there. There was no marketing budget. It was a small town of 6,000 people. Yeah. and they kind of created a name for themselves.
Yeah,
But
they
like
did.
even the winemakers are like, natural winemaking there is like, they don't have any equipment. That's, you know, the guy had built this thing for people getting into the industry who were like, oh, I want to try my hand with natural wine. But the thing about natural wine that people don't realize is like, oh, there's no resources, there's no dollars in it. And you're like, that's the point, because
Yeah.
it's super, it's high,
Yeah.
it's so sustainable. And a different way that you don't think about is like, how do you just make magic out of basically nothing? Like, they're vineyards, they're just going in there and picking stuff, and then they make these incredible wines, and
They're all super intuitive
Yeah.
as well, like that.
not trying to add anything in there, not trying to hide anything. So it's like, if you screw up in the vineyard, your wine is screwed up. You know what I
Right.
mean? If you screw up in the wine cave, your wine is screwed up. So there's no way to kind of like, with natural wine, I think there's a bit of a misconception about like, oh, it's this cool fad and whatever, or even beers that are doing more spontaneous stuff, is like, you can't really hide behind industrial preservatives and all these
Right.
weird things
Yeah.
that kind of fudge the product a bit. So I think that's like Vagabond, is like, how do you just get the barrier down between you and the people that care about this stuff? You
So
know?
describe what Vagabond was there or
Like,
is.
Well, it's
Like, what was the
basically-
process of, like, what were you guys doing with the pop-up?
Well, the pop-up basically is an opportunity for us to just still be creative and do our chef stuff, but in different locations. So I think the thing we love about traveling, and I'm sure as most chefs do, is going somewhere and like finding the local cuisine and learning a bit about that, and then like making dishes with that.
Yeah.
We've always done that. We're crazy. Like we'll like drive anywhere to get like one ingredient. But you know, when we were in France, we did that first pop-up there, and it was just like a brunch pop-up, even though I hate brunch and most chefs do, but they don't really do brunch culture there. And we were like,
Right.
this is like something a little different, you know, like
Yeah.
we'll do kind of a brunch. And then, you know, we were using the local ingredients, and I was like, I felt like such an amazing chef because everything was just turning out so good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't even have to do anything. Like, this is already the citrus and everything.
Yeah, this-
already tasted so good. I was,
We went
you
to
know.
some citrus. There's citrus
Yeah.
farms out there that are growing like hundreds of different varieties. We went and explored that, and then
Yeah.
got some of those, and that was just like a novelty. You're like, this is amazing, you know?
Yeah.
So, and is
But then
that
that's
something
kinda like-
you're bringing back to Canada then? Or are you going to do some Vagabond pop-ups?
Yeah, we did. Like we got back, and then we decided that we would put a little bit more time into building that brand. And I guess we did our first. Well, we did one in Calgary, and then this summer we did one at this little cafe called Take Care. And it's like a cafe, and it has a hair salon weekly. And they have this beautiful courtyard, and a couple other restaurants. I think Darling Wine Bar, and then they did their own pop-up last year. And then they were just looking for someone to take it over. And I think like normally you would just take it over and do like wine and cheese and meat, but like we like to take everything to the next level. So we kind of set up this little, I don't know what you want, barbecue pit.
Yeah, it was a hearth, and
A hearth, yeah.
we bought a little
We built
pizza
it.
oven. We're like, we have to.
Yeah, so we did everything
Yeah,
in the little wood-burning
outdoors.
pizza oven, and we built this little cooking setup in the back. And every time someone would walk in, they would like see Roger back there cooking stuff, and then we did some of the cold dishes from the inside. But I guess the point being, like, we love cooking with like natural, like in a natural way, so over charcoal, wood.
Yeah.
But the space just had this awesome feel to it. So, you know, it was stripped back. Like, you know, it was a really awkward little space to work out of. So, like, you know, it just, people would come there, and I don't know, they felt like really relaxed. And I think, you know, I mean, it wasn't like the food was probably not
There was no.
came out slower.
Yeah.
It wasn't imposing, you know. It wasn't
Yeah.
like. And I think that was like something you learn with like that place we went to in France. The agriculture is like, it's just like, yeah, you just have a piece of land, and we make this product, and here you go, and that's all it is. And you just, there's nothing more you need. Psychologically, it felt really nice to be in that kind of space. And
Cooking
I think,
outside.
how do you bring that into a restaurant? Like, what is like a healthy psychology of a restaurant? Like, that's kind of a interesting question. I think it's like sometimes it becomes so loaded with all these things that you need.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you necessarily need them, or if they just become in the way. Or
We had no advertising. We did literally on Instagram, and there was no reservations, and you just kind of like show up in the back alley of this like crappy back alley. And we have this like little rickety sign, and then you just come in, and it's this beautiful courtyard. And I think, you know, I'm sure some people would have been like, what is this? You know, but it brought the right kind of people in, and then
Totally.
we just had fun with it. And, you know, it was challenging. I think our team, there's a lot of setup and
it's a
tear down.
dynamic space.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I don't know. It's like it felt like a challenge, and I think we always. I don't know. I like to challenge myself, and we like also to challenge the people that work with us. And I think some of the most challenging jobs I've ever had, even though I hated them at the time, we were talking about this earlier, those are the ones that you remember. Like they, like the crazy chefs that have yelled at you, even though it's like not right or healthy, but it's like, unfortunately, that's the stuff I remember.
You got to get, you have to push people sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to do that, push them in the right way.
Yeah,
obviously.
we're not yelling and freaking out, but like.
So one of the things that I was thinking about when you guys were talking about like doing a pop-up and like you said, like maybe the food's coming out a little bit slower.
Yeah.
One of the things, like even if you're in a really, beautiful restaurant in Canada and just, beautiful surroundings, there's still this like baked in expectation that the food's going to be quick. You know what I mean? It's just like you're in this beautiful restaurant, you have a nice glass of wine, and it's like, hey, like where's my food? And it's like, why are we, but is that something that maybe something that you would want to take from European culture and kind of transplant here?
I would say yes, for sure.
Yeah, how do you, well, it's interesting that's like, you notice with some people that would come, like they would get wrapped up in the moment, and they'd be like, "Oh, the food! They didn't even notice."
Nice.
Sometimes you're like freaking out. You're like,
"Oh
my god,
so sorry,
yeah.
Food took forever, and they'd be like, "Oh, really?"
Yeah. So how do you create an atmosphere that's like,
that allows for that kind of like you get lost in the moment and you're not worried about where your food is? Because I know bringing our kids to Europe when we went last time. That's what I wanted my kids to experience. Is I wanted them to realize like we're probably gonna have like 4 or 5 courses. It's gonna take a few hours, and just sit and chat and just enjoy it. And they loved it. So I think more of that culture, bringing that here would be awesome.
Right.
Mentors. Do you guys have you had a lot of mentors that have kind of got you to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, the chef that I wanted to work for in Paris was pretty, he just got awarded, where the chef, he actually passed away, but the guy that he was mentoring just opened a restaurant. He just got 3 Michelin stars, and the whole industry gave him like a star for like, I don't know, like an appreciation thing for his work and stuff. And I think it's just like, there's a lot of crap restaurants in Europe, and even the Michelin ones, there's a lot of bad things happening in those restaurants. And I think a lot of the people think it's like the glorification is going to grant you some sort of something positive, but it isn't that way. And I think you have to find these people, and for me, having those mentors, or there's a Japanese chef I worked for called Yoshi in Edmonton too. And I think it's just like, you have to have self-integrity, and these people, when they have self-integrity, it goes straight down the line. And it really, when you start to see someone deviating and being disrespectful, it sticks out. But whereas if you have a whole organization and it's an instant culture, because you split-second decisions, if you have a chef who doesn't have self-integrity, it's terrible, And I think a lot of that is like, it's so bad in the industry. You're like, well, it's kind of a little bit more complicated than that. It's it's the individuals and of course the hours and all these things, but you have to have self-respect. And if you're not bringing that into that space, you're never going to get respect from the employees or anyone, you know? So that was an education for me.
I like that. What about you?
Yeah, I've had a few in like different aspects. I would say obviously like, we worked for a chef in Belgium, and he was Kobe Dresser Maltz was like pretty, he's kind of like, I don't know, he's kind of like a bit of a rock star vibe, he really, he's kind of a vagabond in a way, because he like opens up all these amazing crazy restaurants, and he attracts all these awesome chefs from all over the world, and then he just kind of like, he'll just close them and then like do something else, or like he just went to Sicily and opened something, and he was pretty inspiring. I didn't work as closely with just him. Like I worked, with other people that ran his businesses. But he was kind of like, when we talked earlier about Greg, kind of cherry picking people for certain jobs. I think he also really had that knack for picking people to work for him that were like incredibly talented. So he was really inspiring to watch. And then like on a more local level, I started probably like where I really understood like local cuisine and working with farmers was through the Kalina restaurant. So I say Brad Lazarenko was a big, he really like trusted me to do my own cuisine, and I made probably some really awful dishes, but I also made some really great ones there too. It was that's how you learn as a chef. So having someone trust you to be able to make those mistakes as well is that was a pretty pivotal time for me. And then I would say for sure in the Blind Enthusiasm, there's a couple, Greg's always been really supportive, and I really admire his business sense. And I don't know, it's like pretty awesome to work for somebody that's so successful, but also really grounded. Mm-hmm. And then, I guess I have a few, and then there's also another woman that works through the company called Shauna. She's their operations manager, and she just like, I don't know, she's kind of like the mom of the whole business. I don't know if I always hate when people call me mom, because it's such a like, it can be kind of funny when you're like, of course I'm the woman in the business getting called mom. But she just, I don't know, she's just like this woman that can do anything. If you need something, she'll just like whip it up, or like whip up a spreadsheet, or just fix something. And, she taught me, like, even though they didn't come from a food background, I really learned a lot about the other side of business from them. And I still call them all the time if I have a question about anything, and they've just been incredible. So
I like that.
Those are my top ones.
The nice thing that I see with Greg is his vision is so long term. It's not immediate. It's not like, hey, this has to happen in 2 months, in 6 months. He's building something that is like, it's years in the making.
Totally.
And to see that patience and that vision come together is really, really cool. What would you have, so if somebody was starting out as a chef, I guess I'll put it that way. What advice would you have, or has someone given you advice that you kind of think about? What would you pass along to a young kid?
Just starting out, eh? Jeez.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
But you know what? I got told that, and I was like, I feel like my uncle or somebody in my family said it, and I was like so pissed off, and I was like, fuck you, like I'll show. I swear on here, sorry, but
you just did.
I did. But I was kind of like, it kind of fueled me up, and it's like people tell you like, don't do that. It's like a degrading industry, and you're just like, I'll show you, and then so maybe I needed to hear that. It really fueled me. But I think I talked a little bit about this before, but just think about your long-term plan as well, because a lot of chefs go into it. I know I was pretty young, and I could work like 16-hour days, no problem. But it's just thinking ahead and thinking a little bit more long-term. So like, how can I get the most out of my career? Should I also maybe take some courses on the side or something relevant? Like, can I work for a business that will put me through management courses as well? Or like, what can I get out of every job? Like, take strategic steps in your career so that you aren't, you're not lost when you get to a point where you can't work in a kitchen anymore, because it probably will happen. There's the odd freak out there that can work the line until they're, like in their 50s or 60s. But I think, like, just, be prepared for that. And then my other one that I always tell people is just travel, because, here we are talking about going to Europe a million times, but you don't really understand where your skills are as a chef if you don't get out and see what else is going on in the world. And obviously now we have Instagram, and there's a lot more connection between chefs or parallel industries in the world. But I think if you really go and plunk yourself down in another kitchen that's challenging for you, you're going to learn quickly like the things that you need to work on, or the things that you're also really good at. So I would never have known. Like, I thought I was pretty decent at being a chef, and then I got there and I was like the worst cook in the kitchen, and like I worked really hard, and I always had like a crazy work ethic and a good palate, but I didn't know all the technical stuff that some of these chefs learned in school. And culinary school here versus culinary school in a place like France, for example, they're like completely different beasts. So they have a lot more, it's longer. Ours is pretty quick, and I'm not putting down the program at all, but it's just a bit more, they have a bit more of an intensive program. So I would say, just make a plan for yourself, take strategic steps in your career, and then travel and learn from as many people as you can. And do that a lot as well when you're young, because it's easier. You can move around, and you don't have as many. What do you think, Roger?
I'm trying to think of this. It's like being around even just fermentation. It's like kind of a weird analogy, but in Europe they take for granted how much, like, they're like, oh, I made this vinegar, and you're like, okay, they don't use preservatives, a lot of preservatives. They don't spray. They don't do all this stuff, and then it's just like spontaneous. But they don't they take for granted a lot of these like these basic things that are like more that they can do things that are just like, yeah, just do it. It's like you go to Europe and sometimes they'll be like, oh, how do you do this? They're like, oh, you just leave it. It's fine. But here in Canada, where like I think if you're going to get into the industry, you really need to connect with farming. You have to understand you're like a chef, and I think it's very difficult to stay motivated throughout your career if you don't connect with something that's more grounding than just like, you know, whether that's like you being humbled, you know what I mean? Being humbled or connecting to something that's real. Like what is farming all about? Or maybe food production. For me, I wish I would have, if I could go back, it'd be like, go learn about cheese making, go learn about charcuterie. Like there's all these other facets you can develop as not just being a chef, but all these other arenas that we maybe don't have access to in Canada as much, because it's like either you're in the service industry or you're like a food scientist or industrial engineer for a food production, who unfortunately a lot of those people are also disconnected. So we have this weird disconnection, and I think if you can figure out a way to connect to something that's like going to last throughout your career, that motivation will build as you go, and it, you know, it's healthy. It's a healthier way to kind of look at your long term, I think.
That seems like the way I'm envisioning that when you say that is that's almost like becomes a foundation for, you know, so as a chef, knowing, you know, maybe you use the example of cheese, like, so how to make cheese, how to butcher. Because you learned how to butcher, didn't you, when you were in Europe, right? I remember you telling me that last time.
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself a butcher, but actually I worked here at Acme for a couple of years with Corey, and that was an awesome experience. Yeah. And I mean, obviously it takes more than a couple of years to like learn everything, but you know, I got a little taste of it. Excuse me, and then I went and did a stage in Italy, and sometimes I like don't know how I got the balls to do this, but I went to this little town in Penzano, and this place Dario Cecchini, he's kind of like a famous Italian butcher, and I just like strolled up with like pretty basic butchery skills, and then I went and did this stage there for like, I don't know, it wasn't a long time, and it was just like a couple weeks, but I think I was like the second woman that's ever done anything in the butchery. It was me and this other American girl. At some point she had come, and they were awesome. Like it was a really funny experience, but I was just so nervous. I almost like couldn't even go. I was just like staying in the middle of this tiny town by myself in an Airbnb, and then I had to like go into this Italian butcher shop to do something that I wasn't like that, you know, trained. Well, I had a little bit of experience, but anyway, they were super nice.
You had like a photo. You were wearing like chainmail, because they had like the old school chainmail. I was like,
it was intense. But I remember I had like a Japanese butcher knife. They were just like, what is that? And they just like wouldn't. They're like, here's our Italian butcher knife, and they wouldn't let me use it.
Yeah, I can see that.
But, yeah, that was a pretty.
So, and when you tell that story, like that to me is like what Greg kind of like, you know, saw in you, right? Same thing as what he saw in Doug, which is, you know, a young person who had done way more at the point in their career than they should have. You know what I mean? Like, which is cool. I like that.
Packed it full of experiences.
So one of the things, like, I guess I'm always curious when I see like a couple that works together, because not a lot of people can pull that off successfully. You guys seem like you guys are legitimately having fun together. Like, you guys were in France for a year, and you're still smiling at each other, so that's a good sign. What's kind of the secret to working together if you're gonna be a couple?
That's a good question. We worked in Belgium. We were working 18-hour days together. That was
that was pretty intense.
What do you think?
I mean, like, obviously there are challenges. Like, we do bicker, and I'm sure anyone that worked with us this summer at the pop-up probably saw a couple. But nothing, you know, we really respect each other, and I think it's, like, really just communication. It's kind of as cheesy as that sounds, but, like, if we have something where we're, you know, we often have a difference of opinion on how to cook something, and, you know, like, it takes a while to get there, but we'll talk it through, and then we end up kind of, like, compromising on, you know, coming up with the right solution, or or one of us is just right and the other one's wrong.
Yeah,
that
that
happens too.
happens. You take take it on the chin or whatever.
Yeah,
you know?
I think I don't know. We have worked together in pretty stressful situations before. Like I think, like Roger was saying, we worked in this place in Europe, and it was like intensive 18-hour days, and like it was just like go go go. It was really busy. It wasn't like the Michelin restaurant where you're like just doing one thing. It was like a really busy, high, like, you know,
high
like,
volume,
volume.
very high quality also.
Yeah.
It was an impossible restaurant. Honestly, it was. Because that was Chef Colby Desmeralt, and he had hired this sourdough master baker, and he built these German engineers came and built her a wood burning oven, and it was like, and she worked with a mill. Every week they would mill fresh flour from this old mill and stuff, and then there was like a guy who was doing the cocktails, this barista. She was like amazing and like knew where it was just like a weird combination of like the impossible, you know. All the food was cooked over charcoal, like big charcoal grills.
Yeah.
Like, it was all like analog cooking. There was like one thing, like one induction burner. You know, it's like you had to totally train your mind. We were like trailing off, but we're very good at that. But but that restaurant was like pushed us so hard, and we just had to learn how to work in a high stress environment, because you're with a team and you don't want to be like fighting. And
right.
you know, we even worked the couple that was running it at that time for the owner. They were like in the same position where they were both. She was the chef and he was the friend. They would get in some pretty intense fights. So we saw that.
So you kind of get that as the bar, and then everything else seems like less stressful than that. Exactly. That's good, but I think you got to put yourself to the test when you're, like I said, because there's a lot of things that people say you shouldn't do. One is you shouldn't get into business with family, which is true. And then couples shouldn't work together. Yeah. So it's good to see like when things, there's exceptions to the rules. So it's good to see that when you see one like that. So that's good.
Yeah, I think it's.
Yeah, I think it's. I think a big part of it is we're both, like, my brother and his wife are both lawyers, and they're a big part of our business too. So. Yeah. Breaking all the rules, but I think you really have to have the same motivation. And I think if you go through the motion of this intensity, you figure out what do you actually value? Like, what do you care about? Yeah. Because, you really get to know people, even working 18-hour days with anyone. Yeah. Within a couple of weeks, what a person is like at their worst. And you just have to be like, hey, like, we know each other. Let's just work together. Yeah,
totally. Even when you asked us earlier, about why we got into cooking, we kind of had like the same answer, which is that we both went to Europe and we were inspired, and then you want to bring that back, and that's like we've always had the same passion and kind of like similar interests. So when we go traveling, it's just I don't know, it's like pretty easy to when we want to do the same thing.
Same vision in a way.
That's really cool. So what is the vision for you guys? Like, if you look out 5 years from now, like, what does, in your mind, what does Vagabond look like? What does the fermentation business look like?
I definitely would hope to have beer vinegar by then. Yeah. So, but I think it's like, as I'm doing more stuff with the business, and we're doing stuff with Vagabond, it's like you realize the difference you can make with, whether it's like in your own way to kind of work with farmers and figure out how to tell their story a little bit. Just connecting those stories and telling that to people, I think, is really powerful motivation and to build a community and to build that connection. Because without that, I think, it's like the resources you can do so much more. You can help people grow their own business, their own ideas. And I think there's such a lack of that, not a lack, but it's very difficult to get into a space where you can help people grow things that are not in a box. You know what I mean? I think that's a very difficult thing to do. So if you can build that yourself and then give resources to people, I think, I don't know, that's maybe a bit of an abstract.
No, I like that. But when you guys, like, because you guys are clearly passionate about what you do, I'm just curious, because you guys have more of an inside look than I do. How would you describe, I guess, the culinary scene in Edmonton or in Alberta? Are there a lot of, passionate people similar to yourselves that are kind of looking at doing projects like this? When you look at the industry, are you hopeful, or are you going, oh shit, it's heading in the wrong direction?
I think I'm always hopeful. I do notice a lot of bigger restaurants around the world have a lot of Canadian chefs running them. It's there's quite a lot of people out there, and I've also seen a lot of them coming back, and I think that's awesome because they'll bring their experience, and then I would say culturally, we could probably use a few more exciting things. There are a lot of great restaurants in Edmonton and obviously Calgary and Canada, but there's always room for more. But I do think, I don't know, because kind of what we touched on is I think you have to travel to learn, and I think because of that fact that we don't have a lot of specific industries to learn from, there's nowhere to go learn vinegar making or cheese I mean there are, but not in the same context as some other countries. But I think because of that, the Canadian chefs are quite well rounded. If you want to have a certain kind of sourdough bread at your restaurant, you probably have to make it, there's not a ton of bakeries.
Oh yeah.
And even if you did, the cost of it might be too much, or it's so I think I noticed that the Canadian chefs are really well-rounded. If they're interested in charcuterie, you see a lot of people dabbling in that at their restaurant, whether or not it's good sometimes, but it's questionable. But I think, I've noticed versus, say, for example, French chefs, which already have all this, there's a butcher on every corner and they have a baker on every corner. They don't need to learn that stuff. They can just get someone else to make it for them.
Or go work in a bakery.
Or go work at one of them, yeah. So there is a lot of potential, and I think that's why they're, when people like hiring Canadian chefs, because of they're hardworking people, from my experience anyhow. So I think, there's a lot of potential for more. I'd like to see more unique things open up, but I think it's just I want to see more independent restaurants, and we're going in a big direction of these big corporations opening up multiple locations, and it's great, and you need that, but it's really hard for the small people to succeed and make a living. So I hope that it's going back towards that, and I do think people are kind of, the demand is there, I believe. So
I was just thinking, so my friend Robin, who works for Jasper Park Lodge, I remember chatting with him about you once because he was trying to get you when you were at Biera to come out for was it Christmas in November? I can't remember.
I think it was, yeah.
But you couldn't.
I was so busy.
What I'm going to tell him, we should do something Vagabond related there. That'd be really cool, because I think talking about all of the things that you guys are talking about, I think there's a lot of people that are interested in that. I think that would be something really, a really cool kind of area to kind of share that story.
Well, I think it's I'm sure a lot of people have looked at us and been like, what are you guys doing? We have we've got a bunch of different things going on, and our end goal has been the same for probably the last 10 years, where we've been wanting to open something where people can stay overnight. And I don't necessarily want to open a restaurant ever, but I want to open a place where about hospitality, and I want people can stay overnight, and you cook for them in a different context, like you were talking, stripping all that stuff back, and we talk about building outdoor equipment and then having Lessig scale up, so that they can produce everything for the business, and be that
more resources
resources between the two.
It's interesting though. You're talking about the food scene thing, and I think I it's funny because I feel like I'm usually the optimist, but I feel like I'm quite pessimistic with the food culture in Canada, and not to say there's a lot of potential, but I think it actually it's a pretty significant hill to climb, and I think we underestimate how much people are I'll just kind of casually address it. It's no, we need some serious firepower and resources, and I think it actually will take a lot, because just talking about health. It's if you don't have access to good food, clean food, that's kind of something that we have to, unfortunately, it's not a topic a lot of people want to talk about, and that's fine. I think a lot of people just want to go and buy the thing, or go to the restaurant and have somebody decide for them, hey, I've picked all this stuff for you, or I've selected this because there's some value to this. And I think it is a pretty serious problem, not to bring that kind of
no.
Well,
I think it's good.
It's even sometimes you get these events, and it's you'll have people want to praise that junk food, hot dogs, and there is a time and a place for that, but then it's sometimes we go too far into that. And I think, you know, there's I guess when you talk about healthy food, people probably like start snoring, you know, like I remember someone did an interview at Vera and they're like, oh, what makes the food unique? And I was like, well, it's like we're at a brewery and the food here is like curated dishes so that you like don't feel like really gross and full. Like I didn't just eat like a, you know, 10 pounds of chicken wings and, you know, not that I love chicken wings, but, you know, like the heavy stuff. And then, you know, just thinking about like what you're, you know, sometimes beer can make you feel a little bit more full. And then like, what are you eating and how are you balancing that? And then all the ingredients that we're using are actually like really good quality ingredients. So they're kind of healthy in a way. And I don't know, people are often bored hearing about that, but I do think you need to talk about it because we have like a weird food industry here where it's like our market and health culture, like it's really hard to sustainably buy good quality ingredients here because the markets are like still kind of a niche thing. Like it's like you go to the market and you get your things at like maybe at Christmas or Thanksgiving, but they're not like, you're not going there twice a week to get your groceries because it's too expensive. Like I can't afford to do that. So people go to Costco and it's cheaper, I think. I don't know. But I guess, just now I've trailed off.
No, but just normalizing that, right? As part of the food culture, because you're totally right. I mean, the stuff that we eat is processed, and going back to just simple foods and to your point, you know, why you guys are attracted to Europe. I mean, that's the inspiring part of it, right? Is going back to simplicity. So you know what, I love like how passionate you guys are about what you do. So thanks for sharing your story, because I think there are a lot of changes that have to get made, and I think, you know, hopefully, you know, as more chefs are inspired to kind of, you know, go in this direction, right, and kind of give people those options, because the easiest option is the processed shitty fast food, and
you'll make more money.
But like I think people sometimes get afraid to like take a risk too, like you know, and not to keep going back to Vera, but like there were definitely some people that did not like it at the beginning. They were like, where is the pub food? And I'm sure I've talked about this a million times, but now I look back and I'm so proud of it. Like I'm so happy that it like pushed the boundaries of people, because if you want to just coast along, that's fine, but like if you actually want to make a difference, you're gonna have to piss a few people off along the way. And like, you know, you gotta remember that. Like it hurts and you take it personally, but there's no other way. Anyone who's paved a path has pissed people off, and then like, you know, you just stick with your vision, because if you try and mold it into what you think people want, it's like people don't know what they want a lot of the time. It's your job to show them what's good and do a really good job.
Especially as a chef and as someone who's passionate about what they want. Because when you guys are describing, you know, what you're building, it is going to take you guys building that vision and then people seeing it. And what's funny about that is at that point, people look at me like, oh, okay, I get it. And it kind of looks like obvious, and it kind of looks like, okay, So that's what's cool, is you guys are building something that it does take a vision, and it'll be fun to kind of watch you guys as you go. So thanks for sharing your story, guys.
Thanks for having us on.
Okay, take care.